Welcome to Gospel Greetings number 118. Today we begin a new series on the book The 10-Second Rule by Claire DeGraff. Last week we concluded our Full Armor of God series with Why We Don't Armor Up. From James 4:13, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. You boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. See, our pride is what keeps us from daily crying out to God for his armor. When we put on the full armor of God, we literally put on Jesus. Like Romans 13 says, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. This week we will be starting with chapter 1 of 10-Second Rule, called A Rule of Life, from John 14:15, which says, "If you love me, you will obey what I command." Several groups have done this book and loved it. It just keeps coming up in conversation. For example, several guys, when asked, "Have you ever seen God do anything amazing?" They say no. And then when asked, "Has God ever spoken to you?" They say no. And this is so sad. You see, this book speaks to hearing God's voice, to our obedience, and of seeing God work around you and through you. The book was written by Claire DeGraff. He was a business guy who owned a manufacturing company, grew up in church and kind of believed all the claims of Christ in the Bible, etc., but it didn't seem to make any tangible difference in his life. He was more excited, as he says, about girls and making money than he was church stuff. He was what he calls a beige Christian, a cultural Christian. Claire lays out the difference between being a lukewarm cultural Christian and a passionate follower of Jesus. He exhorts readers to choose a life of radical obedience to whatever Jesus asks by using the 10-second rule. After exploration and experience of his own, DeGraff is convinced that this is the life Jesus intended for us, and that it leads to more fulfillment in your spiritual life than you could ever hope for. He says, "I think we Christians who were once on fire for God often slowly and unconsciously drift towards religious activities, even good ones, because they're relatively convenient and culturally acceptable forms of obedience. It's a spirituality that we can measure ourselves and others by. It's familiar and predictable, and it still leaves 90% of our waking hours for ourselves." And then he goes on, "What is it that causes one believer in Jesus to become a passionate follower, someone whose life significantly impacts other lives, and another to settle for a life of beige Christianity?" Well, you know what it is? It's a decision, an act of the will, a personal decision to be far more serious about being like Jesus, whether when anyone else in your life is or not. And here is the 10-second rule. Just do the next thing you're reasonably certain Jesus wants you to do. Just do the next thing Jesus wants you to do. And in brackets, and commit to it immediately in the next 10 seconds before you change your mind. And that's what Jesus is talking about in John 14. "If you love me, you will obey what I command." You see, God is speaking. The question is, are you hearing, and will you obey what he says? Over the next few weeks, we will explore how to live by this rule, some guidelines in its use, and some practical examples of how it works. Pay attention to those little nudges of conscience or action you are getting into this week. You might be surprised.